Good day, FedPhoenix fam. So, first off, I would like to say we are over a third of the amount of subscribers I need to be monetized on my channel. So, if you have not yet subscribed, please do. Please feel free to share content from the channel if you think it can be helpful in any of your formats or forums, or if you just think you could do me the wonderful favor of helping me get more subscribers. There's a gnat flying around and it is driving me insane, so expect a whole lot of swatting in the next few minutes. So anyway, I want to do a video about preparing for your loved one to come home, because this has been something that has been a topic a lot lately in some internet forums I'm in, and with a couple of clients. And I want to just kind of touch on it and make a brief video, giving y'all some tips and ideas and whatnot to really help this transition. Because for a lot of people, they don't have you. They don't have a loved one who is waiting for them on the outside and willing to proactively be supportive. But for those who are fortunate enough to have the incredible blessing of that, I want to do what I can to help facilitate or help you facilitate a smooth reentry, or smooth as possible for your loved one, okay? So the first thing that needs to be done is a couple months before your loved one is getting released to go to halfway house or home confinement. And we'll just say halfway house because that's most likely where they're going. Additionally, if it is home confinement, that'll be supervised by the halfway house. So these are pretty much two sides of the same coin. It's just where they're sleeping at night is slightly different. But keep in mind that when a person is in halfway house or in home confinement, they are still an inmate. So they may meet their PO at this point, they may not. The PO may want to come to a home visit. They may not, And none of that is really worth stressing about or worrying about, because, you're still an inmate at this point. You're still considered to be in BOP custody. And that does make some things a tad bit different than if you were, well, a good bit different than if you were at home on probation. And that needs to be, acknowledged in this situation. But a couple months before they're expecting to transfer out to home confinement or halfway house, they need to send an electronic cop-out to the reentry department at their facility and ask for the specific handbook for the halfway house that they will be dealing with. And they need to familiarize themselves. And knowing ahead of time what the procedures and the protocols and the policies and the rules are will give them a real leg up when they get there and adjusting and adapting to the new environment. Additionally, you, the free loved one, can look online and probably find in PDF form the handbook for the halfway house, as well, as these tend to be public information. And this will put you in a position to really kind of put together their halfway house bag in a way that none of their new possessions are going to be rejected. But also because you are their supportive person, you being familiarized with procedures and rules and all that, and this very new environment with a lot on the line, puts you in a better position to advocate for them, to help them advocate for themselves, and to help them just be aware of things. So both of you, the inmate and you, need to familiarize yourself a great deal, as much as possible, with the handbook for that particular halfway house. And a lot of people going to halfway house have 6 months, a year, whatever to do at the halfway house. In that type of time frame, most halfway houses in their handbook will outline structurally at what point as a halfway house resident they can transfer while still under the supervision of the halfway house to home confinement. You want to know that time frame, and you want to know what changes and rules or expectations will happen at that point. And because some halfway houses, when you're in home confinement, and that's another thing you need to keep in mind too, is all the halfway houses have their own rules, their own policies, their own procedures. They do their own thing. And so just being familiar with a halfway house, in the federal system, does not make you familiar with your loved one's halfway house. And things change over time. So you really want to make sure the information you have is specifically accurate to that halfway house, as well as up to date, right? So, and then you can tell your loved one too, hey, listen, once you get there, we just got to get you working quick or whatever and get things in order, because I was looking at the handbook and, 3, 4, 5 months after being there, you can transfer to be at home, to be on home confinement for the remainder of your halfway house time. And this is what we need to do, A, B, and C, to make that happen. What else? Another thing you're going to want to do as the loved one is you're going to want to educate yourself. You can find YouTube videos, read articles, whatever. Personally, as a YouTuber and as a person who uses YouTube frequently in my day-to-day life for a myriad of things, from my house plants to, basic car repairs, I, of course, always recommend YouTube. And then you get the auditory, the written, the spoken instruction or situation, as well as something visual to really tie things together better. But you want to educate yourself on post-incarceration syndrome. It is a type of PTSD that most inmates come home with some level of. And even if at this point you don't see that with your loved one, you're like, no, they're fine. They're fine. We're all happy. We're all excited. No need to worry about negative things. Get prepared. Because even if they believe they're fine and they don't have any post-incarceration syndrome, there will quite likely come a time shortly after they come home where it will be very apparent they do, either to them or likely to them and those around them. And you need to understand it, and you need to understand how to cope with it and be a supportive role for a person who is going through that. And there are things your loved one can be doing that you can advise them to do when they're getting close to leaving prison to help buffer, some of the PIS, the post-incarceration syndrome. These things include counseling. And I know that mental health services are grossly lacking in nearly every federal facility, if not all. So sometimes instead of counseling, it ends up being journaling, right? And you really want to kind of just organize your thoughts and process things visually if you can't do them with like a therapist, out loud. And really just kind of make sure you're in a good headspace and make sure that things that need to be addressed, within yourself or your own thought process are being addressed. And, and as a former inmate who journaled, I can certainly recommend that periodically when you're bored and you're looking for something to read, go back and read through some of your journals. And really try to have an objective look at not only situations, but also your perspective of them, and how you dealt with them or processed them, and where there may be room for some growth or improvement, and consciously make those changes or those developments. Another thing your loved one can do, with your encouragement, is switch up their routine. The underlying two things, or the things that really exasperate post-incarceration syndrome, are the fact that you've lived in an environment for a period of time, possibly a long period of time, of extreme depravity, where you have been dehumanized on a daily basis. That's just normal routine. It's become normal for you to be dehumanized. And in addition to that, a lack of choice. The average person in the free world, consciously and subconsciously, collectively makes about 4,000 decisions. It's a lot, right? In a 24-hour period while they're awake. An inmate makes about 400. So when people come home, it's very, very normal to get extremely overwhelmed, to develop some anxiety, maybe even depression, because your brain is trying to transition from a very abnormally small amount of decision-making, consciously and subconsciously, to this very large amount. And while under a great deal of pressure and duress and transition and things going on, and so much is on the line, and, you need to start preparing yourself mentally and even subconsciously, mentally now. Create more variety. You're changing your routine. As inmates, we tend to get into a routine. We stick with it because it passes the time. It makes things very predictable, which makes them somewhat less stressful. But you want to switch up that routine. I was a person that did not really hang out in the TV room. I didn't like it. I thought it was a crappy little place where a lot of BS happens, and so I just didn't want to be associated with it. But towards the end, I started making myself, early in the morning when there wasn't many people in there and there was almost no risk of any nonsense, I started making myself go in there and just kind of, idly watch whatever's on, because that wasn't part of my regular routine. I started, switching up my what I ate out of my locker. I started, I might, start walking laps for a few days. And then I would go, okay, I've done that for a few days. What can I do different? And I would do, some other thing. I would consciously, towards the end, every 2 or 3 days, incorporate a new thing that I don't normally do into my routine, and then make myself switch it up again, 2 or 3 days later. Like maybe the next change would be from this time to that time frame every day I read, specifically. Then maybe a couple of days later, I change it to, You know, instead of showering at night, I, shower at night, but in the morning I also take a quick shower, or just little things that were creating variety to make my brain just be more active and be more creative. And that will help you when you get home, because now you're kind of almost like training your brain, you're conditioning it to more change and more adjustment and more thought and more decision making. And then you also really want to think about the fact that when your loved one comes home, right? When they go to the halfway house, and then eventually they'll either be home or in home confinement at home while still an inmate, or be home as a person on federal probation. A lot of things are going to be different. Even if they were just gone for a year or so, a lot of the technology has changed. Certainly dynamics and relationships, friendships, whatever, have changed greatly, probably well beyond you've even noticed, because these things happen in the free world the way that they happen, that we rarely notice them. Whereas a person coming home is going to pick up on things that you don't typically pick up on, because your brain just kind of dismisses them as insignificant. But they will be very significant to your loved one. And one of the worst things you can do to a person coming home or just came home is really bombard them, because people want to be helpful, right? And often loved ones are like, oh, very kind of aggressive or overbearing with, let me teach you this, let me show you this, don't. When your loved one comes home, if they need help with working the new remote, you show them. And if you see them fumbling with it later, trying to figure it out, do not go over to them and go, oh, let me show you again. Oh, do it. Don't. If they let them figure it out on their own. And if by chance they truly need your help, let them reach out for it. And this is going to take a lot of patience and a lot of self-restraint from you. But again, this is a necessary component in assisting your loved one in their transition back. Another thing, and you guys know I'm about 16 months home, so I'm still on my reentry journey, is when you first come home, most people really want to hit the ground running, right? They want to line up jobs. They want to regain custody of their children or establish a visitation schedule. They want to, get their health in order that has been grossly neglected for months or years. Like, there's just almost a checklist in your head of things that, as soon as I get out, these are the 5,000 things I'm going to do. And I'm going to tell you, when your loved one is achieving the things they want to achieve, when they're making progress, when they're making upgrades, you're going to know, because they're going to go out of their way to tell you about it. And celebrate with them and really hear them and encourage them. But a downside that you need to be aware of too is what you do not want to do. Because the idea here is you don't want to add unnecessary stress, or they're already going to be incredibly overstimulated. You do not want to pile on top of that. You want to be a respite. You want to be a source of calm and peace and rationality. So let's say your loved one comes home and, hey, I got that job. A couple months later, hey, they moved me into a better position. Oh my gosh. Hey, I see my kids the other day, and, I'm going to file some paperwork to get, set visitation. And hey, I'm blah, blah, blah. There may be gaps of time where there are no exciting, break out the champagne, woo, I've got some good news, some progress to report. And when those times come, don't badger them. Don't pressure them. Don't go, hey, so what happened with that court order to get set visitation to see your kids? I know you were so happy to see them. And understand that they are in a tsunami, mentally and emotionally, and just, in reality of things to do and things to get done and thoughts and feelings. And you going up to them a couple weeks later and going, so, hey, did you file those court papers? Did you get it done yet? Is going to add to their stress. And even though you mean well, and even though you're trying to be encouraging and supportive, you be encouraging and supportive in a passive role, not an aggressive role. You let them come to you with good news, and you celebrate it with them. And when they tell you they're trying to do certain things, in day-to-day conversation, if you told me you were trying to set up your LLC because you want to turn this side hustle you have of selling baked goods into a real business, I'm going to follow up with you on that, right? If it's been a couple weeks or a couple months since you've mentioned it, I'm going to say, hey, so whatever happened with that, because that's a very normal thing that people in the free world do. It's part of our communication. It shows an interest in that we're interested in what's going on with our loved one, and that we care and that we want to be supportive. When you're dealing with a person, whether it's PTSD from they just got out of the military service, whether it's, post-incarceration syndrome because they just got out of prison, when you're dealing with a person who's dealing with a certain amount of trauma and is in a transitional point in their life, you don't want to offer aggressive support like that. You want to offer passive support. So when they tell you, yeah, I got A, B, and C done, you stand, you clap, you encourage them, right? But when you don't hear a follow-up, when there's a gap between these stand up and clap moments, you don't want to badger them or even really bother to ask them much about, so what's happening with this? Or, hey, how's that going now? You want to just relax. If you're wondering how things are going at work because, they've got this new position or they got a position and they're kind of shooting for a higher position, wait for them to start talking about work. And then if you really must, that's when you go, hey, so what happened with that promotion you were trying to get? Or what happened with that, But do not, without them leading you into a space where it makes sense for you to ask this. And I'm not saying it doesn't make sense for you to ask things to people you care about and you're close to, but I'm saying this is the passive communication style you want to embrace. Let them open it and lead the conversation that direction. And then if you really just can't help but inquire, that's when it's reasonably appropriate. And if they're kind of evasive and it's probably because either A, they're mentally wrapping their head around some aspect tied to this, and you don't want to pressure them to kind of force their hand to do that any quicker than they're naturally able, or what they have to say or their assessment is not really positive, and so they don't want to share it because they want their interaction with you to be positive and to be a source of relief and joy. And if that's the case, if they say, oh yeah, man, at the job, they're finally letting us get that hour lunch break, but they haven't mentioned that other position they wanted or that pay raise they wanted or those particular hours they had been wanting that they didn't have. Yes, it's appropriate at this point to very calmly just ask and don't bombard them. So what about this? Is just one small thing. So what about those hours you were trying to get switched at the job? And if they're evasive, if they try to change the subject, if they're kind of muddling around an answer, just let that go. Let it go. Do not pressure them to elaborate or try to force their hand into, and them being evasive or them muddling around or them changing the subject is not about you. 99% of the time, it is not a personal attack on you. It is not a slight towards you. It is not them trying to keep you out of their life. One of the things you have to learn when dealing with a person with an amount of trauma, particularly fresh trauma, as they're in a transitional period, which is high stress, is their thought processes, their choices, their behaviors, sometimes even the things they say to you, a lot of times really are not about you. So you cannot be a selfish person in this situation if you want to, successfully be supportive. And, oh, they're not talking about this. They just don't want me in their life. Or I'm not insignificant enough to talk about their child custody situation with now. Or maybe they're telling someone else if they're not telling me. And so, I'm getting buffered out of the picture. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't make things about you that are not about you. And in doing that, not only will you stress yourself out and probably come off a little crazy, because it is a little crazy, although I understand the logic, but you're really going to dump a lot of crap on them mentally and emotionally that they don't deserve and is counterproductive to their reentry. So, and another thing too is if your loved one is going to be expected to work in the halfway house, which unless they are retired and disabled, whatever they will be, if they are not somehow checking about jobs while they're incarcerated through other friends or family or whatever, then you may, or thinking about old jobs they had that would rehire them, then you may, and even if they are, you may want to start looking into that as well. You should know your loved one's strengths and weaknesses, particular skill sets they have, interests they have. And maybe, even if you don't mention it to them because they have their own plan, kind of start, looking around to see what other options exist. So, and you don't want to overwhelm them with options. Remember, we talked about that. But just so you know. So if the day comes that they come to you and they go, hey man, my cousin got me hired at that shop and I appreciate it and everything, but man, it's toxic for me there. Or the guys are always drinking in the bay and I can't really be doing that. Like, I don't want to mess up my papers and it's just uncomfortable for me. I need to find something else. Because chances are they have a plan, but they don't have a backup plan. Some come out without even a plan, or they have a plan A, maybe the very few a plan B, but certainly after that, there's nothing. You be prepared to fill in those gaps. But until they need you to, or unless they ask you to, don't fill in those gaps as a casual conversation, because again, you are going to be overwhelming them and overstimulating them. And they're already going to feel like things are in turmoil and happening at a very rapid pace, and they're having a difficult time keeping up, quite likely. And you don't want to snowball that with your own demeanor or mind state or conversations or whatever. So, and don't pressure them. Don't say, hey, you've been home 2 months, still haven't got down to the DMV and renewed your license, man. You got an ID, but you need a license, because when you get out of here, you're going to get a car. And although that's wonderful and you mean well, it's too much. It's too much. Remember, supporting a loved one coming home from prison is a passive art, not an aggressive one. So I just wanted to drop this video and talk about this a little bit, so that when people come to my channel, they're able to get at least this little kind of toe in the water on what to expect and how to deal with a loved one coming home from prison. And, to help you, go through that experience, but also to help you be a supportive role to a person going through that experience. So with that, my Cash App and PayPal will be in the description if you'd like to donate to the channel or tip me for information you found useful. As I've mentioned before, that will largely go towards the endeavor of me putting my book together, in all honesty. As some of you know, I'm trying to move, and so that is not cheap either, so thank you if you choose to help. Also, my email will be in the description if you would like to contact me for any reason, if you think I can be of some help to you, or some insight, or if you're just generally curious about these things and you have some questions that you'd like to address. I'm more than happy. Oh, and there'll be a link to the merch line in the description as well. So please get you some FedPhoenix merch. We really need to stand up and let our voices be heard in regards to the fact that inmates are human beings. Human beings are human beings, including inmates, right? Including former inmates. And treating people as such is ultimately in the greater interest of the community and our society as a whole, as a collective. So let's humanize the inmate. Let's humanize the felon, the convict. And let's start moving forward and healing as a nation. So with that, good day, God bless. And I hope this information is helpful. And again, if you have not subscribed, please subscribe. If you can get other people to subscribe, even better. So thank you and good day, God bless.